Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Silva. Thank you for joining me. I'm here to talk to you about what I call the Superman effect, by which I'm referring to not only increased arousal and bodily strength as a result of elevated levels of the neurotransmitter and hormone norepinephrine, also called noradrenaline, that's the British approved name, but also the concomitant modulation of pain perception during these periods of intense stress, in the context of the fight or flight or freeze phenomenon. Some animals freeze, like deer and opossum. Not only does norepinephrine give you superhuman strength, but you're impervious to pain as well. Now, not really superhuman, and not really impervious, but you get the idea. We've all heard the urban legend of the mom lifting a car off of her injured child in a state of panic following a car accident. But there are more credible anecdotal reports out there about people in crisis tapping into so-called superhuman strength during emergencies. Now, this is not to be confused with having the Superman complex, which in psychology is a condition characterized by an unhealthy sense of responsibility. The belief that everyone else lacks the capacity to adequately perform tasks. You have to do it yourself if you want it done right mentality, seen in corporate leaders with an inflated sense of self-confidence who take on more responsibilities than they can handle. Nor should what I call the Superman effect be confused with Superman syndrome, the chromosomal aneuploidy, an abnormality in chromosome number in which males have an additional Y chromosome. I googled the Superman effect as a title, and these and other variations came up. Then I googled the Superman effect in crises and got the Superman effect in the context of crises refers to the phenomenon where a single powerful individual or entity emerges during a critical situation, providing a sense of hope and inspiration, often by taking decisive action and seemingly overcoming insurmountable odds, much like the iconic superhero Superman does in comics, effectively rallying others to face the challenge with renewed confidence. So, yeah, I'm not talking about that either. Just out of curiosity, I kept Googling, this time the Superman effect in emergencies, and AI gave me a hybrid. The Superman effect in emergencies refers to a psychological phenomenon where individuals, often in leadership roles, feel an overwhelming urge to take on extraordinary responsibility and perform beyond their normal capabilities during a crisis, potentially leading to risky behaviors, poor decision-making, and neglecting their own well-being, much like the fictional superhero Superman, who believes he can handle any situation alone. I don't know that Superman engaged in risky behaviors, I can't imagine what those would be, and was poor at making decisions, but I'm not talking about someone else coming to the rescue. I'm talking about the strength and analgesia that are part and parcel of a surge of noradrenaline. So I added the word personal. The Superman effect in personal emergencies refers to a psychological phenomenon where someone facing a crisis suddenly feels an extraordinary surge of strength, focus, and capability, allowing them to perform actions beyond their perceived normal abilities. Getting warmer. Finally, I added a comma and norepinephrine. When referring to a Superman effect in personal emergencies, norepinephrine is the neurotransmitter most closely associated with this phenomenon, as it plays a key role in the body's fight or flight response, essentially allowing individuals to access a surge of energy and strength during critical situations. This surge is triggered by the release of norepinephrine, causing physiological changes like increased heart rate, blood pressure, and muscle tension, enabling rapid reaction times and heightened focus. Finally, wow, AI is truly amazing with Google searches these days. So anyway, apparently no one but me is linking norepinephrine to a superpower. I thought about calling it the Hulk response, except it's not always anger that brings it on. No, I'm talking about the temporary physiological state that's brought on by external stress, usually triggered by a crisis in which actual physical or psychological harm is possible. Sometimes the threat is purely psychological when a person is angered or embarrassed. Sometimes the person may be facing a physical danger or even a life and death situation. The latter are rare for any given individual, but in the fight or flight or freeze response, the body reflexively and instinctively prepares itself for the worst case scenario, as if every such situation were a matter of survival. And that's of course because this response evolved over millions of years to achieve just that. And so when noradrenaline shoots out of our adrenal glands and into the bloodstream and is released from the brain, affecting the heart and arteries, the lungs and muscles and skin and just about every other organ, it doesn't matter if the trigger is social anxiety or a mountain lion. The effect is the same. Appropriate in one context, a bit excessive in the other. And that's because civilization and neuroses have arisen in the blink of a geologic eye. And evolution has nothing to say about performance anxiety. Now, you might be more inclined to freeze in a situation that involves the headlights of social anxiety or the footlights of stage fright and the fear of being humiliated, or in the middle of a panic attack brought on by performance anxiety before a speech or meeting and the fear of being scrutinized and unfavorably judged. But otherwise, when the adrenals explode, we usually charge or run for the hills, and we need the increased pulse and blood flow to our skeletal muscles to carry us away or help us fight. Arteries clamp down everywhere in response to norepinephrine, driving up peripheral vascular resistance and blood pressure along with it, and then they dilate locally in the muscles of the extremities, where there are more receptors that vasodilate in response to norepinephrine, and where muscular activity is already producing carbon dioxide and maybe a little lactic acid, where there's not enough oxygen, lowering the pH of the surrounding tissues, which further promotes vasodilation. That's how the body knows to shunt blood to the skeletal muscles. In addition to providing more oxygen through its effects on the vasculature, norepinephrine can directly increase the force of muscle contractions by activating beta-2 adrenergic receptors on muscle fibers. And so we truly are stronger thanks to norepinephrine, which increases the force and speed not only of skeletal muscle contraction, but cardiac as well. Not only is the heart beating faster, way faster, a chronotropic effect, but each ventricular contraction is stronger, more forceful, an inotropic effect. Norepinephrine also has metabolic actions, stimulating glycogenolysis, the breakdown of glycogen stores in the liver, which releases glucose into the bloodstream, an energy source to be used by muscles during what the body anticipates will be intense activity. Again, regardless of whether we're talking about a speech or a black bear. Necessary for survival in one context, excessive and completely inappropriate in the other. Extremely useful in one, causing symptoms like flop sweat and tremors in the other. As far as preparing the body for battle, it turns out to be a false alarm in the case of stage fright, and we're left with flop sweat, a quavering voice, rapid, shallow breathing. In still other situations, when the response is intense and when the threat is largely imaginary, all that sympathetic nervous system activation with nowhere to go frequently manifests as and culminates in a panic attack. Otherwise, if we encounter a rattlesnake, we should be busting out the cape and tights and flying into the stratosphere as fast as possible. There are other physiologic effects. The pupils dilate to take in as much light as possible, and tear production is increased to keep the eyeball lubricated, optimizing vision. And in the lungs, norepinephrine is a bronchodilator for obvious reasons. Maybe I should have called it the Hulk response, because it really does transform the organism from rest, and certainly anger can do it, just as easily as fear or anxiety. But what I really want to talk about is not how norepinephrine makes you stronger. Most people know that. What I want to focus on in this video is the little-known fact that norepinephrine acts as an analgesic, or more properly stated, a pain modulator. An analgesic provides analgesia, which is defined as the inability to feel pain, whereas norepinephrine causes a relative hypoalgesia, a diminished pain response. I want to talk about how when norepinephrine is increased, either paroxysmally during a fight or flight response, or more subacutely, as when one is taking an SNRI, a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, or similar noradrenergic agents like Strattera, or a stimulant like Adderall, or pretty much all the tricyclic agents, the perception of pain diminishes. We've heard stories about injuries that people sustain during accidents that, because they're in so-called shock, not what doctors mean when they use that term, by the way, except maybe psychiatrists, but because they're in shock, they didn't feel it when it occurred. They didn't feel the cut or the scrape or what would later develop into a bruise or a lump. Were they truly impervious to pain? Or at least fairly low levels of pain? Well, it turns out that norepinephrine plays a role there too, because at the level of the spinal cord and in the brain, norepinephrine inhibits excitatory pain pathways. More than a century ago, scientists applied epinephrine to the spinal cord of a cat and demonstrated that catecholamines modulate pain-related withdrawal responses in felines. It turns out that norepinephrine on the way down, released from descending efferent pathways in the spinal cord, suppresses pain by inhibiting alpha-2A adrenoceptors, a subtype of adrenergic receptor, norepinephrine receptor, on afferent ascending nociceptors, sensory receptors on afferent neurons that react to painful or nociceptive stimuli. So you actually get suppression of these pain signals from the top down. This then reduces the release of excitatory neurotransmitters in the spinal cord. It's a cascade. This is an oversimplification, but this is theoretically how norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors like Cymbalta, which is FDA approved for neuropathic pain, fibromyalgia, and chronic musculoskeletal pain, reduce pain in patients with chronic pain syndromes. Not only does norepinephrine inhibit pain pathways, but it also activates alpha-1 adrenoreceptors, which activates inhibitory interneurons. The nervous system is an incredibly complex web of neuronal and interneuronal connections, and the analgesic action of norepinephrine, officially we call it a pain modulating effect, is different supraspinally above the level of the spinal cord, i.e. in the brain and brainstem structures, than in more peripheral areas of the central nervous system. What's more, studies have shown that peripheral norepinephrine has little influence on pain in healthy tissues, whereas in injured tissues, it has variable effects, including potentially aggravating pain. The theories as to why are esoteric and well beyond the scope of this brief video. It's enough to note that norepinephrine affects pain signals. I mentioned this in passing in my Strattera video, although it's not been proven and it's not FDA approved. We would think about any medication that increases norepinephrine as possibly being good for chronic pain syndromes, especially syndromes like fibromyalgia and neuropathic pain, because increasing norepinephrine at the level of the spinal cord does help with that type of pain. I was glad to hear from a viewer who shared his experience thusly. This is the first video that I've seen that talks about Strattera helping with pain. I was put on Strattera after issues with Wellbutrin, which also increases norepinephrine and dopamine, and I wasn't sure if it was working for my daily concentration, distractions, or focus, but I noticed a reduction in anxiety, negative self-talk, especially at night before bed, and my joint pain issue that I've had for 30 years. I'm able to walk without as much pain and discomfort. I sleep much better at night and not tempted to nap on weekends or days off. I don't sleep in. Once I've had 8 to 9 hours of sleep, I'm awake. So my mental health has improved through less pain, better sleep, and much less anxiety. So this viewer enjoyed a host of benefits, including not only beneficial effects on his mood — atomoxetine has official approval for use as an antidepressant in other countries, by the way — but also a degree of hypoalgesia. So that's it. I just thought I would share that very interesting neurological fact with the laity. And for you students and trainees out there, I encourage you to research the topic if you want more specific information about a phenomenon that natural selection evolved in us because animals in crises, either fleeing or engaged in mortal combat, survived better if they could ignore the pain caused by minor injuries that would otherwise have distracted them, possibly to death, so they could attend to the emergency and lick their wounds later. Those creatures with that ability survived to pass along the genes that further developed this superpower. Thanks for watching. As always, comments are always welcome.